Hello to those in Platinum, hello to those online, and hi to guys here. If I haven't met you before, my name's Warwick, and I'm one of the pastors here, and I get to teach the Bible today, which is kind of cool. Friends, life together, well, it can be complicated, can't it? Deep in the core of our beings, we all know that we were created for relationships. And for most of us, the absolute highs of our lives all revolve around relationships. If you go and see incredible things, it's so much better if you do it with others. If you achieve something, it's so much better if you can share that achievement with others. Life is so much better when we do it together. And yet life together can be incredibly complicated. So complicated that some of us have actually come to Dubai to escape. To escape relationships. We've come for a fresh start. We've come to escape the pressure. We've come to live a life here without a whole stack of the expectations that our former relationships have brought on us. Some of us have come to escape mistakes and heartache. Some of us have come because we've made such a mess of our relationships that we've actually wanted to reboot our life. We've been so hurt by relationships that we've wanted to create new memories here without the memories that we've left behind. Others have come because life's actually good. We've come for an adventure and we've really wanted to enjoy what Dubai is. But as we've done that, we've discovered that having relationships in a place like this can be fraught. It can be more difficult because at home, well, things were simpler. They were easier. Here, it's a different story. This morning, we're going to meet a man who has made a complete mess of all of his relationships. He decided that he knew what was best and he decided to go it alone. He ended up being estranged from everyone. He murdered his younger brother and then he took off and he ended up in a city like Dubai. And if we read his autobiography, if we listen to the spin doctors, you might be tempted to think that the fresh start that he had did him the world of good. That he took his chances. He married, he started a large family, he established a city. His offspring were unbelievably successful. They definitely had his genes. One of them established a livestock empire. One of them established a significant and innovative engineering business. And the third started a music industry, the first one ever. He was self-made. He did it all on his own. And for so many, he is the picture of success. He's the confirmation that individualism works. He's the poster child for going it alone. The man's name is Cain. He's Adam and Eve's first son. And what we're going to discover this morning is that his life is all that you and I should ever need to see to convince us that going it alone, and when I say going it alone, I mean living life without God. His life ought to be enough to convince us that no matter how good it looks, going it alone, life without God, never works. This morning what we're going to do is we're going to discover that life together with each other only works when we do it with God and one another. How about we pray and ask God to help us to understand His word and understand the devastating effects of sin? Would you pray with me? Our gracious God and our loving Heavenly Father, we do pray that as we look at your word this morning, you would indeed speak to us. Help us to understand sin and its tyranny. Help us to understand how life is so much better when we do it with you. Open our eyes and help us to see. Unstop our ears so that we can hear. And soften our hearts so that we can respond. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. There's an outline of what we're going to be doing this morning. It'll keep popping up on the screen as we go through. How about I get you to grab your Bibles and turn with me to Genesis chapter 4. If you've got it on your phone, if you've got it on your pad, that's great. If you've got it in paper, even better. And let's have a look at Genesis chapter 4 together. It's one of those chapters in the Bible that has everything. Sex, lies, murder, denials, trials, and great feats. It's also one of those chapters that has lots of unanswered questions. Like, where did Cain's wife come from? All right? Yeah, we're going to have questions. But this morning, as we have a good look at Genesis chapter 4, what I want us to do, though, is to explore what it's saying. And as we do, let me encourage you not to be distracted by some of the questions we might have, but let me encourage you as we explore the text to allow it to ask us questions. Let me encourage you to wrestle with the things that it wants us to think about. How about we remember the story? It begins like this. Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to a son, Cain. And Eve said, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And she conceived again and bore him a brother, Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain worked the ground. And when the time came, Cain brought an offering to the Lord, produce from the ground. Abel also brought an offering, the firstborn from among his flocks and the fat portions. Now God had regard for Abel and his offering, but he had no regard for Cain and his offering. And so Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And the Lord said to him, Cain, why are you so angry, and why is your face fallen? Don't you know that if you do well, you'll be accepted? But if you don't do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is to have you. But you, Cain, you must rule over it. Now Cain spoke with his brother Abel. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and he killed him. And the Lord said, where's your brother Abel? I don't know, Cain replied. Am I my brother's keeper? What have you done? The Lord replied. For your brother's blood cries out from the ground. Cursed are you from the ground, for it has opened its mouth to receive from your hand the blood of your brother Abel. No longer will the ground yield its strength to you. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer over the face of the earth. My punishment is too great for me to bear, Cain replied. You have driven me from my fields. Your face is hidden from me. I'm to be a fugitive and a wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me. Not so, said the Lord. For anyone who kills Cain will be avenged sevenfold. And the Lord God put a mark on Cain, so that whoever came upon him would not attack him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and he settled in Nod, which is east of Eden. And he knew his wife. She conceived and gave birth to a son, Enoch. And then Cain built a city, and he named the city after his son, Enoch. That's the story. Let's leave it there for the moment. There's some more to it, but we'll see it as we go. It's pretty clear, isn't it, that it all starts to go wrong with the sacrifice. Have a look at in verse 3. We read, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, that is, his crops. Abel also brought an offering. His was the firstborn and the fat portions. And then we're told the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Now, on first reading, it's a little hard to understand why he's pro-Abel and not pro-Cain. The text doesn't seem to make it all that clear, but there might be a clue in the description of what Abel brought. Did you notice that Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and the fat portions? Cain, just produce. Abel's firstborn fat portions, they're the most precious, the most valuable. His sacrifice seemed to be a sacrifice. Cain's, not so much. And God rejects it and has no regard for Cain either. Did you notice Cain's response? He goes after God. He's miffed. He feels hardly done by, and he's angry. Verse 5, very angry, and his face falls. And God at that point gives him a choice. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry and why is your face fallen? Here's your choice. If you do well, you'll be accepted. If you do not do well, and you didn't, let's face it, I've knocked back the sacrifice because you didn't do well. You've got a choice now. You can listen to me or you can go it alone. Now, you don't get much more going it alone than killing your younger brother. Unless you then throw in arguing with God about your punishment and then refusing to take it. Did you notice verse 12? Look at the last part of the sentence. Cain is told, you will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. So what does Cain do? Verse 16, he walks out on God. God doesn't send him away. Cain leaves. He chooses to go. And then he does what he's been explicitly told not to do. Look at verse 17. Cain knew his wife and she conceived and bore Enoch. No, the problem wasn't sex, okay? The very first command that God gave in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, right? Sex is God's invention. He thought it up and he created it for marriage. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is what comes next in verses 16 and 17. What do we read there? We read, then Cain built a city. And he named the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Can you see what was wrong with that? What was Cain's punishment? To be a wanderer and a fugitive. What does he do? Builds a city. A structure designed to give him roots, permanence. He builds a city, a place where a fugitive can find protection, where they won't be threatened. He's to be a wanderer, builds a city. Even in his punishment, Cain does it his way. And on the surface, he really does look like he gets away with it. Like so many people who live their lives their own way, there doesn't seem to be any consequences. God just seems to let them be. After all, Cain's family grows and they are wildly successful. Have a look at verse 20. We read there as we look at some of Cain's descendants. We read that Adar bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe. And Zillah bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. These are major industries. And Cain's family starts them off. He looks like he got away with going it alone. But that's where, secondly, we need to notice the lie of being alone. Can you remember the choice that God gave Cain? Lots of people think it's the choice of going with God and going it alone. But the truth is, going it alone is never an option. Look again at verse 7. God says to him, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin is crouching at the door. And the image is that of an animal crouching ready to pounce and devour. And God warns Cain. He says, sin's desire is to have you, but you must rule over it. What's he getting at? What does he mean sin's desire is to have you? I think the answer's right there in the text. In the Bible, in Jewish writing, ideas often come in pairs. Sometimes you get the same thing said in different ways. Sometimes you get one thing and then it's opposite. In this case, God gives Cain two alternatives. One is the opposite of the other. Sin's desire is to have you, option one. Option two, you must rule over it. That is, sin wants to have you. It wants to rule over you, but you must rule over it. In other words, Cain, you can come with me and let me rule by empowering you to rule over sin and put sin in its place, leave it impotent in the corner. Or you can let it rule. Oh, and by the way, once sin starts to rule, it never, ever stops. It never lets go, and it never gives you back your freedom. Sin is crouching at the door, Cain. It longs to devour you. Can you see the options? We either go with God or we go with sin. We're either ruled by God or we're ruled by sin. Cain, which one are you going to choose? Because there's no third option. There's no option to go it alone. You and I, we'd quite like that to be the case. We'd like that as the option of choice, and that's the lie. The lie is that we can be free agents. The lie is that we can rule ourselves, but we can't. So the choice we have is simple. We can either be ruled by God or we can be ruled by sin. Now, the sobering truth is that as we keep reading in the pages of the Bible, every single one of us, everyone in this room, you and me included, have chosen to be ruled by sin. Just like Adam, just like Eve, just like Cain, we've chosen along with the rest of humanity to be enslaved by sin. Sin rules your life and it rules mine. It rules our relationships. It destroys the very things that we love the most. You see, your life and my life is complicated. But it's not complicated because it's hard, but because you and I are enslaved to sin. Sin rules our hearts. Sin distorts our motives. Sin inflames us so that we say things that destroy, so that we do things that corrode, so that the very things that we long for eat away at our relationships. Sin wrecks everything that you and I hold dear. Whether it's our sin or the sin of others, sin simply destroys. Now, I get that at this moment, the picture is pretty black, right? There is light coming. Hang with me for a little bit longer, but we need to see just how black it is. We need to make sure that we get what Genesis 4 is teaching us, which means we thirdly need to see that there are painful consequences when it comes to being ruled by sin, serious consequences of going it alone. The consequences, though, aren't necessarily seen straight away, but we do see them over time. Cain chose to be ruled by sin. Sin saw him rise up and murder his brother. And we see the consequences as we look at Cain's DNA flow through his family tree. We see the insidious spread of sin as we meet Cain and his children and their children, and we watch that DNA filter through. Listen to Lamech's words. Lamech's down the family tree a little bit. Lamech's speaking. And he says to his wives in verse 23, Adnah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I have to say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, Lamech's is 77-fold. Cain killed his brother over jealousy. His offspring, they kill just for about any reason they like. Cain's revenge sevenfold, Lamech unchecked revenge. And he's proud of the violence. I, me, Lamech, Lamech, Lamech. He boasts of his wickedness. Cain's line is ruled by sin. There's a striking contrast in the chapter on the other side of the family tree. From the other side of the family tree, we are told, verse 26, that side of the family tree is characterized by calling upon the name of the Lord. That is, listening to him and going with him. Not going it alone, but going it with God. Because Adam and Eve had another child, Seth. And he also had offspring called Enoch and Lamech. And when Seth's offspring, Lamech, speaks, very different words come out of his mouth. Have a look at chapter 5 and verse 28. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. This one will reverse the effects of the curse. This one will reverse the effects of the fall. This one will turn back Cain's sin. This one will restore mankind's relationship with God. And as we all know, Noah grew up, didn't he, to be the only righteous man in his generation. Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, they were the ones who ended up in the ark, and they're the ones who saw the whole of humanity wiped out because of its sin. God starts again with those 4 families. If there were ever 4 families on the face of the earth who ought to know how serious sin is and how important it is to go with God, it's those 4. When they get out of the ark, what do? Build an altar. What does Noah do next? Plants a vineyard. What does he do after that? Gets naked, completely drunk, and defiled by his son. See, nothing changed. Noah, the one righteous man, could not escape the rule of sin. Let me suggest to you, if he couldn't, what chance do we have? Because he's a better man than you and I will ever be. If he couldn't bring us freedom from the curse, if he couldn't do life together with God, what chance do we have? Even Noah goes it alone. Which brings us fourthly to the question that we need to ask ourselves. The question, if you like, that Genesis 4 is asking us. The question is, are we living alone without God or together with him? How am I living my life? How are you living yours? There are 2 diagnostic questions that we can ask ourselves, that the passage asks us, to help us to find out the answer to this. Are you going it alone, under the rule of sin, or are you going it together with God, free from sin's cruel rule? The first of those diagnostic questions is this: who are you listening to? All the way through Genesis 3 and 4, the question of who we listen to is on view. Remember what we saw last week with Jim? Adam was supposed to listen to God, but he listened to his wife Eve. Eve was supposed to listen to her husband, but she instead listened to the serpent. It's the same here in Genesis 4. Go back to Genesis 3. Eve heard the word of warning from God. She messed up, but at least she paid attention to the curse. Cain doesn't hear a word. In fact, we never hear of Cain listening to God ever. Instead, all we see is Cain speaking. He spoke. He spoke to his brother and killed him. He led him out into the field. When the judgment falls, he speaks and rejects that judgment. When Lamech speaks, it's to boast of his wickedness. Not only that, when he's judged, it's Cain who walks away from the Lord. The Lord doesn't send Cain away. Cain absents himself from God. He doesn't want to hear. He doesn't want to know. The word that God speaks, he rejects. You're going to be a wanderer. He builds a city. The mark of those who go it alone is that they will not listen to God. They do not want to know what he says. They don't want to listen to his warnings. When he speaks about sin, la 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 la, they block their ears. Like a 3-year-old. They can do it very sophisticated ways, but the effect is the same. They justify their behaviour and they say it's love. They want to do it their way without him. Genesis 4 asks the diagnostic question: who do you listen to? And the answer to that question will tell you whether you're a slave of sin or a slave of God. So let me ask you, who do you listen to? The 11:57 on a Friday morning answer is God. After 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, what about the Tuesday at 3 p.m. answer? Yeah. Do you listen to God? I mean, do you really listen to God? Or do you listen to yourself? Do you listen for what your heart longs for? Or do you listen to the one who made your heart and knows what is best for it? Do you listen to your passions, or do you listen to the one who passionately loved you and gave his son for you? Do you hear yourself saying these words? It wasn't my fault. I couldn't help it. He deserved it. There was nothing I could do. Do you find yourself justifying your behaviour, or do you listen to the one who has justified you through the blood of his son? Who do you listen to? God loved Cain. God warned Cain. But Cain wouldn't listen. What about you? Is life messy? Are your relationships not what you hope that they would be? Chances are it's because you're going it alone, not listening to God. Chances are you're probably the one doing the talking, and it's not working. If you're not listening, sin is crouching at the door. It longs to rule you and destroy you. You may not see the effects immediately, but they will come, and they will be devastating. The second question that Genesis 4 asks us to ask ourselves is this: who do I credit? Who gets the credit for the things that I do, for the delights that I have, for my achievements? Is it God or is it me? If you're trying to go it alone, you'll always take the credit. Your career, your house, your car, your. If you're going with God, he gets the credit because it's his generosity and his hand. Let me show you how it works in this chapter. 3 times in the chapter, a child is born. The chapter opens with Eve giving birth to Cain. It closes with Eve giving birth to Seth. And in the middle, Cain's wife gives birth to Enoch. Notice each time credit is on view. Look at it in chapter 4, verse 1. Now Adam knew his wife, Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Why name him Cain? Because the Lord, God, gave her the child. Who gets the credit? God does. That's where the name comes in. Flick down to verse 25 and notice it's the same with Seth. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and she called him Seth. Why? For or because, she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Why Seth? Because that name is a constant reminder that the Lord has provided. Who gets the credit? God does. Now come to the middle. Verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. That's it. Nothing. When he built a city, he called the name after the name of his son, Enoch. There's a name. The city is named, but who gets the credit? Cain. He names his city after his own son. God doesn't get a mention. God doesn't get the credit. So let God's word ask you this. Who's getting the credit in your life? What's the honest answer? The 3 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon answer. The illusion of the self-made man, the delusion of the rugged individual is that they've done it all their own way. But the reality is they've swallowed the lie and been caught by its hook. They're being reeled in and destroyed by sin. Being destroyed by sin as it has its way with them, as it so easily rules them through the lie of their independence, the lie that they're blithely happy to keep on believing because they think they're in control, when all the evidence around them says that it's not them, but sin who rules. So let me ask you honestly, who gets credit in your life, you or God? Are you going it alone, or are you going it with him? Let me ask you another question. Do you want it to be different? Are you worn out by going it alone? Because it is incredibly tiring. Are you tired of sin ruling and the mess that it keeps bringing? Are you weary of its tyrannical reign? Do you want to be free? Do you want to be able to choose to say no to sin and yes to God, and have Him shape your relationships so that they actually work? If that's you, let me introduce you to one last character, the crusher. Last week we heard that God punished Adam and Eve as they were sent out of the garden. They weren't the only ones who were punished. The serpent was as well. Look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. God said to the serpent, "Cursed are you above all livestock and above all wild animals. You'll crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers." That's what we've seen in chapter 4 with Cain and Satan, isn't it? But then there's this promise in verse 15 to Eve, or to the serpent rather. He, one of Eve's offspring, will crush your head and you will strike his heel. God's promise is that one of Eve's offspring would come and crush Satan's head under his heel, killing him stone dead. When chapter 4 of Genesis opens and Eve gives birth to Cain, what's the first question we ask? Is this one the crusher? Is this the one of Eve's offspring who will come and put an end to Satan? And the answer is we are unbelievably disappointed, as the only thing that Cain crushes is Abel's skull, as he submits to sin and is ruled by it. Cain crushed his brother, sold himself into slavery to sin, and took his whole family with him, took humanity with him, took us with him. Noah looked like he might be the crusher, but as we saw, no sooner was he saved than he was drunk, naked and defiled. But if we go through the list, it wasn't Abraham either, or Moses, or Joshua, or David, or Solomon. All of them, every single one fails, all ruled by sin. The whole of the Old Testament can be summed up as the search for the crusher. It's not until we meet who? Jesus. It's always Jesus, by the way. The answer is always Jesus. It's not until we meet Jesus, the one who crushed Satan on the cross, that we are offered freedom from the tyranny of sin. I love the way that Romans 6 puts it, speaks of the freedom that we can have from sin's reign. Have a look. I love this. He says, we know that our old self was crucified with him. That is, if you've put your faith in Christ, put out the arms, you were crucified with Jesus right there and then in about 30 AD. You were crucified on that cross with him. Why? In order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing. What does that mean? Well, so that you would no longer be enslaved to sin. Do you want to be freed from sin's tyrannical rule? Then you've got to get yourself crucified. You've got to come to Jesus and ask that his death would be your death. Look at what he says in verse 7. He says, for the one who has died has been set free from sin. That is so cool. Let me say it again. For the one who has died, that has been crucified with Christ, has been, past tense. It's done. It's over. Has been set free from sin. This is one of these hallelujah moments, right? From the time of Cain until the time of Jesus, there was no escape from sin's rule. It ruled everybody. But now, today, you and I have the opportunity to be nailed with Jesus, to be crucified with him, and have his death be our death, so that for the first time in our lives, we can say no to sin and yes to following God. We can say no to the curse of sin and the tyranny that it brings, and say yes to the freedom of having our lives ruled by God. Remember in Genesis 4, Abel's blood spoke. It cried out from the ground about Cain's guilt. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24, we're told that Jesus' blood speaks a better word than the blood of Abel, because Jesus' blood speaks of forgiveness, of transformation, of cleansing, of change, and of freedom. And Jesus' promise is that he hasn't just freed us from sin's power and tyranny, but that he stands with us day in and day out, and he helps us to live under his rule. He doesn't just give us a bunch of rules. He doesn't even do that. He transforms us from the inside out, and then he walks with us. Look what Hebrews 4 has to say. He says, "For we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who is in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." We have Jesus standing with us, and in every way that you have ever been tempted, Jesus was. Those darkest sins, that deepest temptation that you are most ashamed of, you think God could never understand this. Jesus was tempted in exactly the same way. And do you see what else he did? He did it without sin, which means that when we come to him and are nailed with him and are crucified with him and set free from sin, he stands with us and he will teach us how to say no to sin and yes to God. So he says, verse 16, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace." Let's come to Jesus. Let's come to him. Why? That we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in the time of need. Mercy, you and I will keep sinning, and he will keep forgiving. But also grace. That is real help when we are tempted. That time of need is when sin speaks to us. And Jesus, who knows how to say no, speaks louder. And he helps us to walk under the rule of God in the freedom of being able to say no to sin. Now, for some of you here this morning, God's word has cut through for the first time. You know that your life is complicated and you're tired of sin's rule. You're at the point where you no longer want to go it alone. And this morning, you've done more than just heard words, but you've started to listen to God. You've started to realize that you need to stop talking. And you've started to listen. And what he said about Jesus has made sense. And you want to respond. You want to come to Jesus and say, "Make your death my death. Free me from sin's cruel rule. I don't want to be with Cain. I want to be with Jesus." If you want to be forgiven, if you want the fresh start, if you want the crusher to crush Satan's rule in your life, then come to him now. I'm going to ask the band to come up and they're going to play a song for us. It's a song that's a confession. And in a moment, I'm going to read the words to you. And I want, if this is you, I want these to be your words so that you speak to God and you ask him to forgive you. It's a song, it's a confession, it's a song that understands the cruelty of the rule of sin and the brilliance of following God. Let me read the lyrics. It begins, "I used to nurture bitterness, to count up every slight. The world's a moral wilderness, and I have felt its blight. Self-pity ruled, resentment reigned, no one understood my pain. I spiraled down in murky night, insisting that I had the right to hate and hate again." That's the rule of sin. But then the songwriter looks at the cross and understands the forgiveness that is there. He understands what Jesus has done, and he writes, "But then the gospel taught me how to contemplate the cross. For there Christ died for me, and now I've glimpsed the bitter cost. He bore abuse and blows and hate. He did not retaliate. Triumphant malice sneered and tossed blind rage at him. He never lost the love that conquers hate. He paid the penalty that we owe. And then the writer recognises the freedom that comes from living under the rule of God. To make no threat, to smile, forgive. To love and not because I must, for Jesus showed me how to live and trust the one who's just. To suffer wrong and feel the pain, certain that the loss is gain. Oh God, I want so much to trust, to follow Jesus on the cross, to love and love again. If you want the crusher to crush sin, pray these words as they're sung. Thanks, guys.